Hi folks, my name's Lisa. Welcome to my channel. Today I will be showing you how to knit the rib stitch for a 1x1 ribbing pattern like this swatch. This is the front side, the right side, and the back side is identical. The rib stitch is a textured vertical stripe pattern and is created by alternating knit and purl stitches in the same row, then knitting those same stitches in the next row. So this forms columns of knit stitches like you see on this swatch. You see mostly the knit stitch when it's just sitting still. But if you stretch it, you'll be able to see the purl stitches, which are the stitches that are in between the knit columns. And so today I'm going to be showing you how to knit the 1x1 ribbing 3 different ways with 3 different needles. I'm going to be showing you how to knit 1x1 rib with 2 knitting needles. You'll see how to do the rib stitch with a circular knitting needle. And you'll also learn how to do the rib stitch using double pointed needles. And this pattern can be used for so many great projects. Not only will it make the cuffs on sweater sleeves and socks as well as hat brims, but you can use it on neck collars for sweaters as well as a main pattern for blankets and jumpers. So let's begin. So here I have a swatch started on flat knitting needles, and I am going to be doing the 1x1 rib with a size 7 needle and just some acrylic yarn I got at the local craft store. It doesn't really matter what kind of yarn you do to learn this pattern, whatever you're comfortable working with and whatever size needle you're comfortable working with. The important thing when learning how to do this stitch is to cast on an even number of stitches because you're doing a sequence of knit 1, purl 1. It's a sequence of 2 stitches that are repeated. So having an even number obviously will complete the pattern. Okay, so we're going to start by knitting 1 stitch and purling 1 stitch, and we'll complete that throughout the row. Let's begin. You're going to knit the stitch and then take the yarn and put it towards the front, and you're going to purl the stitch. And then bring the yarn towards the back and knit the stitch. And take that yarn and put it towards the front and purl it. And you're just going to continue this pattern of knit and purl throughout the row. Now if you're not sure what the next stitch is, there's an easy way to tell, and that is knit columns are all going to have this V shape in the column. That will show you that it's a knit stitch. So if your next stitch up is that, you know, and you see the V in the stitch, you know that's going to be a knit stitch. So you knit into the knit stitch. And if you see a bump, like that bump right there, you know that's a purl stitch, and so you're going to be purling into the purl stitch. And throughout the entire pattern, you're knitting into the knit stitch and purling into the purl stitch. Also, you'll know if you made a mistake because the column will be disrupted. I'll show you what I mean. So there's this vertical row here. If I purled that by accident, it's going to create a bump. See that bump? And so you'll know that's wrong. So you'll have to undo it. And then you're going to knit right into it. Go back to knitting and purling. And then to turn the work over, you're going to turn it back so the point is at 3 o'clock and the yarn's towards the top and the front. And then because we have an even number of stitches, the next row is just like the previous row, where you're going to start with a knit stitch and then you'll do 1 purl stitch. So here's knit, put the yarn towards the front to purl, take the yarn to the back to knit, Take the yarn to the front. And soon you won't have to be thinking knit, purl, knit, purl, because, well, there's a purl there. And soon you won't have to be thinking of what the next stitch is because of muscle memory, I suppose you'd call it. But you'll just have a rhythmic knitting going, and you'll know to knit and purl without having to concentrate so hard. You just have to concentrate hard at the beginning, but then it gets easier. So there you have it. That's the 1x1 rib stitch with 2 knitting needles. And next I'm going to show you it on another needle. Here I'm knitting the 1x1 rib stitch with circular knitting needles. And when you're knitting in the round, you treat every row as it's the right side of the fabric, which for a 1x1 rib with even number of stitches, you're always doing the same pattern of starting the row with knit 1, purl 1. Although when you're knitting in the round, you must make sure there's an even number of stitches for the 1x1 rib so that the pattern is complete. And just also remember, because you're not ending a row, you might leave the project for a minute and then come back to it and you'll be like, oh dear, what stitch do I have to start with? Just remember that you're knitting into the knit stitches and purling into the purl stitches. So here we have a knit column, and you can tell because the stitches are straight, we're forming V's. And you're going to knit into that. And you're going to purl into the purl columns, and you can tell that it's a purl stitch because you're knitting into a row that has a bump. Column. See all those bumps? So that's a purl stitch. And in the round, you're just knitting into the knit stitch and purling into the purl stitch. And you do that until you get the length you want to knit. Okay, here we have the double pointed needles. It's a set of 4 needles, and you use this kind of knitting for when you're making sock cuffs or sleeves for your sweater. There you go. And maybe the circular knitting needle is just too large, so this helps you do small circles. And when you're knitting 1x1 rib in the round with double pointed needles, it's just like using the circular needles, except you have to be aware of the last stitch you knit and then the next stitch you're going to knit. So for this, the last stitch I knit, the yarn's in the front, which indicates that it was a purl stitch. You could also tell because it's a bump row. So the yarn's in the front, I gotta move that towards the back before I transfer to the next needle. And then I see this column is a knit column, so I know to knit that stitch on the next needle. When you are knitting also with the double pointed needles, it's a bit of a handful. It's a little complicated, and it gets more comfortable the more you are knitting, but at first it's going to be awkward. So you knit, because you have to hold all these stitches and all these needles. And then hold that needle, that's the new needle, while you put the yarn towards the front, and you're going to purl. And you just have to work with it to feel what's comfortable for you. Everybody has their own method. I'm just going to show you transferring to a next needle. Here's a knit, yarn towards the front for a purl, yarn to the back for knit, front purl, back knit, front purl. Okay, I just completed a purl stitch. The yarn's in the front, but to start the next stitch, I want the yarn ready to knit, because that next stitch is a knit stitch. And it's good to prepare the stitch, prepare it meaning put the yarn in position to knit that next stitch on that new needle. Now in regards to casting on stitches for the double pointed needles, when you're doing the knit one, purl one rib, I would initially cast on all the stitches onto one needle. So for here there's 36 stitches. And then I would divide the stitches evenly onto 3 needles. So I have 12 stitches onto each needle. Okay, finished a row. Prepared my yarn for the next needle. And I move around and I begin. Remember too, when you are binding off with any of the needles, bind off in pattern. So since you have a knit one, purl one rib stitch, you're going to bind off by knitting 1 stitch, purling 1 stitch, knitting 1 stitch, purling 1 stitch, as you cast off those stitches to complete a project. So there you have it. This is the 1x1 rib with the double pointed needles. Here's the 1x1 rib with the circular needles. And then we have it with the 2 knitting needles, knitting the 1x1 rib flat. I hope this tutorial will help you on your next project that involves a 1x1 ribbing pattern. And it's a very nice pattern. It gets very rhythmic, so eventually you won't have to concentrate on knit 1, purl 1. You'll just automatically do it. And let me know in the comments what you will be knitting with this pattern. If this video has helped you, I hope you'll give this a thumbs up. And please don't forget to subscribe to help grow my channel. I really appreciate it. And until next time, thanks for watching. Happy knitting.